I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the rhythmic ticking of the clock drilling into my skull. The bed felt too big. The empty space beside me, a silent reminder of how often my husband wasn't here. I knew where he was. At the office, at another late dinner, at some networking event where deals were made over overpriced wine. I had stopped asking a long time ago. The answers never changed, and neither did the distance between us. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that settled into your bones, the kind that made you question whether you were really living or just existing. Then came the footsteps in the hallway. A slow, measured sound, barely audible over the hum of my thoughts. My pulse spiked. I held my breath. I knew who it was, and yet my body reacted as if I didn't. I forced myself to relax. It was just him, the man who had been staying in our guest room for the past year. My husband's old friend. He had needed a place to stay after a rough breakup, and I had agreed without hesitation. It made sense at the time. He was like family, wasn't he? But lately, things had started to shift. I had begun to notice things I shouldn't. His quiet confidence, the way he carried himself, the way his presence filled the spaces my husband left behind. It was ridiculous. It was dangerous. And yet, the more I tried to ignore it, the more I felt it creeping in. The footsteps faded, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Tomorrow, I would act normal. I would pretend nothing was changing. I would keep playing my role. At least that was the plan. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, forcing a sense of normalcy into my movements. He was already there, leaning against the counter, a coffee mug in one hand, phone in the other. Sunlight poured through the window, catching the sharp angles of his face. He glanced up, his expression unreadable. Rough night? I hesitated. Just a lot on my mind. He nodded, taking a slow sip. Yeah, same. That one word lingered longer than it should have. Same. A simple response, yet heavy with something I didn't want to name. Later that day, I busied myself in the living room, folding laundry. The television murmured in the background, a mindless distraction. He sprawled across the couch, scrolling through his phone, completely at ease. It should have felt ordinary. It didn't. Do you ever help with this, or is that strictly my job? I teased, tossing a sock his way. He caught it effortlessly, a slow smirk forming. Didn't want to steal your moment of glory. I rolled my eyes. Unbelievable. With a dramatic sigh, he slid off the couch and crouched beside me. He picked up a towel, folding it with unexpected precision. Impressive, I murmured. He met my gaze, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. You'd be surprised what I can do. And just like that, my breath hitched. That night, sleep refused to come. I turned over again and again, staring at the empty side of the bed, feeling the weight of something unspoken pressing down on me. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of settling wood. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Eventually, I got up. My bare feet moved soundlessly across the floor, my body acting before my mind could stop it. The hallway felt longer than usual, stretching out like a path I couldn't turn back from. His door was slightly open. I should have walked past it. I didn't. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, shoulders hunched, staring down at something in his hands. The dim glow of a bedside lamp cast shadows across his face. I opened my mouth to speak, but then I saw it. A small, worn photograph. My photograph. A flicker of something sharp and electric shot through me. My pulse pounded in my ears. He hadn't noticed me yet. He ran his thumb over the image, slow and thoughtful, as if it meant something. I stepped forward, my voice barely above a whisper. Where did you get that? He startled, his fingers tightening around the picture before looking up. His face was unreadable, but his silence spoke louder than words. And suddenly, everything changed. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the photograph again, his grip tightening like he was afraid to let it go. The air between us grew heavier, thick with something I didn't dare name. "I don't know," he finally said, voice low. "I just kept it. I should have been angry. I should have asked why, demanded an explanation. But instead, I just stood there, heart hammering. His eyes met mine, searching, waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. "This is wrong," I murmured, but my voice lacked conviction. "I know," he said. Neither of us moved. The quiet stretched, filled with something unspoken. My breathing felt too loud in the stillness of the room. I stood on the chair, reaching up to adjust the loose light bulb. He held the flashlight steady, watching carefully. "Almost got it," I murmured, twisting the bulb into place. And then it happened. A loud spark, a sudden flicker, and the entire room was plunged into darkness. I gasped, nearly losing my balance. He instinctively stepped forward, reaching to steady me. I wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly the space between us was gone. The chair wobbled slightly beneath me. His hands brushed against my arm as he tried to hold me steady, but the sudden movement made me shift my weight too quickly. A line we had danced around for too long had been crossed. The moment stretched. The flashlight in his other hand cast flickering shadows across the room. I exhaled a nervous laugh, realizing how ridiculous we must have looked. Me teetering on a chair, him standing too close, both frozen in the unexpected darkness. It was brief, just a moment, but it changed everything. The power returned with a sudden hum. The light bulb above us flickered back to life. I stepped down, brushing my hands together, pretending like nothing had happened. But as I glanced up, his expression told me that neither of us could ignore the shift between us. When we pulled away, reality crashed back in. My hands were shaking. His chest rose and fell unevenly. I took a step back. "I should go." He nodded, but neither of us moved right away. I turned and walked out, my pulse still racing. The door closed behind me, but I knew we couldn't take it back. The next morning felt different. The air inside the house was thick, like the quiet before a storm. I went through the motions, pouring coffee, checking my phone, pretending I didn't feel his presence before he even entered the room. When he finally did, neither of us spoke. Everything had changed, but nothing had at the same time. We had crossed a line, but we were still here, trapped in the same routine, pretending like we hadn't. My husband came home that evening earlier than expected. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, oblivious to the way my hands trembled when I handed him a glass of water. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. My heart pounded every time I felt his eyes on me from across the table. Every glance was a reminder of the night before, of the moment that shouldn't have happened but did. I wanted to rewind time, undo everything, but a part of me knew that was impossible. Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again. The silence was unbearable. My mind raced with questions, possibilities, fears. I knew I had made a mistake. I knew there was no way out of this without someone getting hurt. Then the unexpected happened. A notification lit up my phone screen. A message. Not from him, from my husband. I frowned, unlocking my phone. His message was short. Just 2 words. "We need to talk." And just like that, the air was sucked out of the room. My stomach dropped. My fingers tightened around the phone. A million thoughts ran through my mind. Did he know? Had he seen something? Footsteps sounded in the hallway. But this time, they weren't his. The door creaked open slightly. My husband stood there, his face unreadable. And then he said something I never expected. Something that changed everything.